All right, sounds good. I'm Rachel McKinney, and we're the Quantum Computing Group. So just a quick agenda of what we're going to be doing today. We'll do a brief technical overview, and then we'll look at the risks and mitigants. And we've divided those into known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns. And then we'll be going with some recommendations our group came up with, and then at the end, we'll have a time for questions. So just in the known knowns is where our technical overview is. We're just going to keep it super basic. And so a quantum computer it's kind of just like a very fast computer. And so standard computer will use bits that can be either a 1 or a 0. But a quantum computer uses a qubit. And when it's held in superposition, it can be both a 1 and a 0 at the same time. And so quantum computers use groups of these qubits. And so when they're grouped, they cause interference. And then it just is like a classic physics wave problem, where when you have two waves and they're asynchronous, they'll cancel each other out, which you can see on the left side. And then if you have two waves that are in sync, they will amplify each other, which you can see on the right. And so you'll get these amplified peaks and troughs. And then since qubits are made up of all possibilities, the amplified peaks and troughs are just like the most probable answers to whatever problem you've set up for the quantum computer.
So in terms of the known knowns, the threats posed by quantum computing, it is expected that it will break encryption. An attack-capable quantum computer will be known to break public cryptography. Obviously, this has some very serious implications for the cybersecurity landscape. It is known to be able to break encryption algorithms such as RSA, the Delphi-Hellmans, elliptic curve cryptography, and even the blockchain, based on the algorithms developed by Shor and Grover. And it can also eliminate the authenticity, non-repudiation, and integrity of digital signatures. However, we don't have to sound the alarm bells just yet. Don't panic. There are some known mitigation strategies. So for instance, algorithms can be swapped for post-quantum or quantum-resistant algorithms. For the case of symmetric key encryption, the key size can just be increased. And already we've seen a bit of some major corporations, you might have heard of this company called Apple, start to take the lead on this. So they've already actually deployed post-quantum encryption for the iMessage. Google, I believe, is developing quantum-resistant certificates for authentication. And NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, has already picked 4 winners. So these are 4 quantum-resistant algorithms that they are working towards developing and standardizing by hopefully the end of 2024. However, even if this is all said and well and done, let's say in optimistically a couple of years, we can rapidly deploy, all things go well. We have this now quantum safe infrastructure. There's still a big digital elephant in the room. And this is what's known as the harvest now, decrypt later threat. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar, this refers to when you store mass data that's encrypted, the attacker can't use it right now, today, but in a few years' times, maybe a few decades, once quantum computers begin to emerge, they can simply decrypt it and use it for nefarious purposes. Now, interestingly, in the scientific literature, there's not much attention devoted to this. There's only a few papers out on this. It seems to be sort of a novel area, relative niche area of research. And this is a huge problem. As I'm sure we're all aware, these large conglomerate corporations, the Googles, the Metas of the world, plus some governments like China, I'm sure we've all heard some stories with TikTok, for example. They've been harvesting large volumes of data for years now at this point. This includes the top level, super secret stuff, the nation states. This could be at the corporate level, intellectual property, trade secrets, down to the user level, the individual everyday citizen, large volumes of personal data. I myself like sharing, what I ate on some restaurant over the weekend or something like that. And so this creates a bit of a race against time. So based on a recent study by Mosk and Piani in 2022, they interviewed a bunch of experts and asked their opinions on when they think the quantum threat will emerge, specifically for the ability of a quantum computer to break the RSA 2048 algorithm within a 24-hour time span. Now, it seems that there's no real true consensus in academia regarding this, but it appears that the timeline seems to be at least 10, 15, 20, maybe even 30 years down the road. And so they've developed this handy strategic risk framework for companies, organizations, governments to use to sort of assess their needs based on their given risk appetite, as well as their, of course, resource capacity, access to capital. There's three sort of main variables to look at here. The migration time. This includes the time to actually, deploy and develop this quantum-resistant infrastructure, based on the resource capacities, logistics, operational challenges, in addition to, of course, the shelf life of their data, which is particularly relevant for the harvest now, decrypt later threat. You want to consider, what data do I absolutely need to store? What data, how long do I have to store this data for? Is there any data that I can delete or make, useless, render useless, so that even if they store it, they've harvested it and they decrypt it, they can't really do anything with it. And of course, this is all plotted against the threat timeline of the actual emergence of an attack-ready quantum computer. So this leads to a question of, can we learn from the past? So historically, if you're familiar with the history of cybersecurity, before becoming sort of mainstream, it seems like a lot of companies, internet sites, they weren't really secure. People did not really take this seriously. Of course, after some major cyber attacks, firms and governments kind of quickly pivoted. They realized, oh shoot, we got to actually take this real seriously, and began spending billions of dollars and resources to set up this kind of stuff. Well, we believe that the quantum computing threat likely represents this next big shift in the cybersecurity landscape. It's going to be a post-quantum world. And we want to avoid the possibility of, pardon my French, but being caught with our pants down. We don't want to be caught in a situation where we can be attacked while we're still vulnerable. Historically, we've been rather reactive when it comes to cybersecurity threats, and so we're hoping that perhaps we can take a more proactive approach.
Well, this brings us to our favorite part, laws and regulation. We have an interesting technology, let's regulate its use. So, but seriously, quantum computing has a few privacy implications that go along with it. The first one being the data retention by the private and public sector organizations. And the second one is law enforcement access to encrypted communications. Now, we know that private sector likes to hold information for as long as possible. And in some cases, they store our personal information for as long as it, or even more than is necessary for their business purposes. We all know what happened with the Ashley Madison case, wherein they were storing personal information even after the users had deleted their accounts. Talking about public sector might have some legitimate justifications for holding data for longer periods of time. With law enforcement access to encrypted communications, quantum computing can pose an interesting concern, because we know that quantum computing has the capability of breaking encryption, which includes the current end-to-end encrypted communications, which are used by the private messaging applications. And law enforcement can use those to enhance their investigative efficiencies in order to break encryption and just look into private communications and sort of expedite the whole process. And this sort of gives them an avenue of just looking directly into the communications rather than just circumventing encryption, or maybe using some methods around encryption, which they currently do. So this can pose a few constitutional law concerns, because breaking encryption can be considered as sort of a more intrusive mechanism of looking into, of committing a search under Article 8, but there are ways around it as well. The current regulatory framework around our privacy legislations is pretty weak. PIPEDA has been out of date. The Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act has been out of date for a long time. It has vague wording, and the Privacy Commissioner's Office is poorly resourced. Privacy Act allows government organizations to hold personal information for 2 years after the use has ended, and they don't need it anymore. As far as the upcoming regulatory framework is concerned, Bill C-26 is concerned with strengthening the privacy legislation for private sector. And Bill C-27 is meant to ensure appropriate cybersecurity practices for critical cyber systems. Now, these are steps in the right direction, but I'm afraid that, and we are all concerned that these do not go so far as to tackle the threat caused by quantum computing, primarily because Bill C-26 is technologically agnostic, and Bill C-27, which deals with privacy, has put a cap on limits that can be imposed on the private sector, which can it's not deterring enough. The measures that we propose in order to regulate or mitigate the risks of quantum threat takes into consideration a mix of regulatory as well as technological approaches. For regulatory approach, we propose a mixture of hard law and soft law mechanisms. For data retention practices, for the privacy implications on private sector organizations, We believe that there should be stringent restrictions on their data retention practices. For example, the current legislation is poorly worded and it's vaguely worded. So there should be strict data retention obligations imposed on private sector organizations with strict deadlines on notifying data breaches as well. And in order to regulate cybersecurity standards, we believe that soft law instruments would be more appropriate through guidelines and codes of conduct, because the big companies sort of regulate themselves, and we want to maintain a certain sort of legislative agility along with the cryptographic agility. As far as the technological aspects are concerned, we believe that introduction of privacy by design principles into the technological products can go a long way in mitigating the threats associated with quantum computing. And we also believe that critical cyber systems should transition quickly to post-quantum algorithms and quantum key distribution in order to maintain the security of their communications. And they should also maintain a potential for cryptographic agility, considering that technology advances rapidly. So we believe that a mixture of regulatory and technological approaches towards regulating quantum computing can go a long way in mitigating threats associated therewith.
So for the education and awareness aspect for quantum computers, we were able to identify one known unknown, which is education for all Canadians. It is quite challenging talking to our experts this week about how to address different diverse groups, communities. Everyone is coming from a different place when it comes to technology, and considering that marginalized groups are at risk in a post-quantum world. Finding solutions to address current digital divides is also a challenge, but incorporating an intersectional framework is pretty critical. It'll help us better understand all of the unique barriers that different groups face when it comes to digital spaces, and it prevents current inequities that are being experienced currently to be reproduced in a post-quantum world. Also, just in terms of education, from a K-12 to like a college university perspective, incorporating quantum education as a pipeline into the workforce and creating the next generation of quantum experts is also pretty critical. For known knowns, we were able to identify two known knowns. So the first one is education on quantum threats. This is pretty critical because Canadians don't really know about the store now, decrypt later threat that is coming with the post-quantum encryptions, and to be aware of the concept of time. So Canadians can act now and be mindful about the data that they're putting online, because there is the implication that maybe their personal data might not stay safe in about 10, 15, 20 years when quantum computers are more of a reality. Overall, research has also found that Canadians don't really practice adequate cyber hygiene, and that could be sort of like a mitigation to help Canadians protect themselves online, and that is something to address with more education and awareness in the future. Finally, the last known is just consumer education. So educating Canadians as more knowledgeable tech consumers is pretty critical. Knowing what to ask companies when it comes to post-quantum encryption, knowing which products are implementing quantum encryption and which ones aren't is pretty critical. It'll help them to manage expectations as well if they know the kind of encryption that is being incorporated in their products, and knowing that nothing is 100% secure when it comes to cybersecurity, and being aware of the vulnerabilities even if post-quantum encryption is being implemented. Overall, more educated consumers will also translate to more interested and engaged Canadians with the conversations around quantum technology, and ensuring that they're a part of the process with the decision-making that's going to come in the future when it comes to Canada's action plan for a post-quantum world.
So we're going into the section of what known unknowns. And so researchers generally agree that quantum computers can evaluate problems at a much faster rate than classical computers. However, we are limited to certain conclusions because of the present limitations in quantum computers. Authentication is an area of concern, as classical password authentication methods may be rendered obsolete. This would affect web application login mechanisms, from how passwords are verified, generated, or inputted. The current ways of authentication may include biometrics, single sign-ins, multi-factor authentication. We know that post-quantum cryptography needs to be integrated in such existing schemes. And research has been done to investigate how that can be done already. But it's an ongoing research effort. Another suggestion as to how we can mitigate quantum threats to authentication systems include how we can make the systems to be more modular or agile, so that if there is ever a time where we need to swap out protocols, they should be able to do so. Another known but unknown quantum threat would be towards the cyber-physical systems, and these systems include the parts where software and physical components are often intertwined to enable safety, scalability, and other capabilities. And this is quite prevalent in our critical infrastructure systems, including nuclear power plants, electricity grids, and transportation networks. It's a growing concern, and in this area, especially since more and more IoT devices are being integrated in the previously very isolated network. And the Canadian government has made it clear that this is an area of their concern as well in the upcoming future. And a lot of the communications are reliant in classical cryptography. So another reiterated theme is to use post-quantum cryptography in the areas where we already know would be impacted. But another suggestion would be we need to identify what more components would be needed for us to make it quantum resistant. So there are many factors as to how it would be impacted for nations to be able to manufacture the leading quantum computers. And we can only make the generalization that countries without quantum capabilities would be vulnerable to many exploits that they are unable to defend when the time comes. As we know it, North America is in the lead to developing the quantum computer, but we also don't know if other competitors have been hiding information from us. And with some mitigation suggestions we can make to combat the digital divide between countries or organizations that may not have access to quantum computers would be more international collaboration efforts in sharing the scientific research in quantum computing, or within the nation, we would have policies to ensure controlled access to the quantum technology, soft laws, or responsible research and innovation mechanisms. We talked a lot about how quantum can break such systems that we know of, but there are actually many areas that we can predict where quantum might be quite useful, especially in areas that require immense computing power. Some areas include in the environment, healthcare, finance, chemistry, material science, and aerospace.
And as we've heard from Jacqueline, quantum technologies application, there's a lot of it across many fields. How do we assess cybersecurity risks arising from quantum computing, with the assumption that the risks will be highly heterogeneous and likely to be unevenly distributed? The diffusion of the various vectors of the risk will likely to be very difficult to predict. And so the problem statement is, how do we conceptualize risk, these new risks, using the risk assessment models we have today? And are they well equipped to deal with these uncertainties? So this is a very traditional model of risk management that's widely in use within commercial organizations and within governments. This particular table is pulled from NIST in terms of their suggestions on enterprise risk assessment methodologies. Risks are individually assessed on vertically, one by one, and then evaluated horizontally based on, their impact, likely impact, and potential response. So there is wide embeddedness in this type of framework throughout, all organizations internationally due to international standardization, primarily through ISO 31000. There are obviously advantages to this type of risk assessment models. Each risk can be evaluated in a very structured manner and then consolidated together, like the UK has done in terms of their national risk register, looking at pandemic risk, climate change related risk, and then risk ranking them based on impact and likelihood. What are the problems though if we're evaluating risk related to critical infrastructure protection? So there are a lot of domain-based challenges when we try to evaluate them across a very standardized format. Domains have very heterogeneous operating conditions. They're subject to different laws and regulations, and they are also subject to different transnational and geographical interdependencies. The people who do the risk assessments are usually domain experts who themselves are humans, and like all humans, we are vulnerable to bias, so there are heuristics in play. The problem we have then is potentially a poor understanding of the interactions and interdependencies between risks and across domains in critical infrastructure protection, and some hazards which could potentially overlap, aggregate, compound, or cascade over time and space. So what is an alternative way of conceptualizing it? If we think about systems theory, it looks at systems as irreducibly integrated. So we don't look at individual component parts, but we also need to look at the complex interrelationships between them. We're not saying let's dispense of the specialized domain-specific perspective, but to consider it as part of just one aspect of a general conception. So if we look at how other disciplines have evaluated complex systems at an individual physiological level, in ICUs, they measure and try to detect multiple organ failure based on intersections between 6 different organ systems. So someone who's admitted to the ICU will be measured based on a scoring model for each organ system and then repeated over 24 hours. And the aggregated score, where it is higher, the risk of mortality is also higher. In biopharmaceutical manufacturing, there are a lot of component units of operations that are extremely complex and can be highly affected by upstream changes in technology. So some scholars have suggested that a model of interaction, probability of interaction between unit operations may be a good way of foreseeing interdependencies. In more complex systems, such as ecosystems, climate science have really advanced the conversation in terms of how we evaluate interdependencies. In this example, the scholars have looked at a model of using historical data to look at the overlaps of multi-hazard events. And the interesting thing is, by adjusting the time lag between events, they can look at the intersection of hazards across time and space in order to build a multi-hazard table or a hazard interaction pairs within different regions on the right side of the presentation. Another way of looking at it is to evaluate risk as an interaction between determinants that are linked to each other. And within those determinants, there are different drivers in the middle diagram that also have interdependencies. And then aggregating risk may introduce different phenomena, including compound unidirectional, compound bidirectional, and then also risk cascades. This then brings us to the more general question about natural resources. The US has begun to look at the global supply chain for critical components, materials, and equipment, and the supply chain risks associated with their interdependencies. Just some conceptual ideas about what we mean by minerals and materials, components and equipment. Materials are raw materials with no inherent functionality. Their utility is linked to their physical properties. Components are built from materials, and they can perform a specific function in equipment, for example, like semiconductors. And in equipment, combines multiple components to perform one or more functions, such as acousto-optic deflectors. From a US perspective, so this map is taking a US-centric perspective to evaluate the various components that will be necessary for quantum computing development. For example, you have the semiconductor technologies in East Asia, and in Finland, kind of high-capacity refrigeration, which will be needed to cool quantum computers. What does it mean for Canada? So Canada's critical mineral strategy, this is a slide taken from it. I've applied kind of what is the quantum lens on these critical minerals that Canada believes it needs for its future. And then those ones that are circled are kind of the minerals that would be necessary, which have quantum applications for the future. If we flip the question around, Canada is very well endowed with natural resources. Within our geographies, we produce and extract a lot of rare earth minerals, and those ones that are circled is currently, we're able to get those from Canada. And so the kind of the overall picture that I'm trying to suggest is that with the natural endowments that we have, with the proximity to the types of human talent that we have and supportive industries, we have a good positioning, in preparing for a quantum future. And the question then becomes, how do we protect these advantages from our adversaries, and how do we leverage them in cooperation with our allies? So this is a summary of the research questions we have been given and some of the concepts and ideas that we have tried to share with you in this presentation. We couldn't spend too much time on quantum AI and quantum blockchain for reasons of time, but this is a developing area looking at intersection between quantum computers and other high-end technological developments, which we touch upon in our reports. Finally, in terms of our recommendations, continuing to incentivize standardization of post-quantum encryption, incentivizing research on quantum technology, mitigating threats through hard legislation and soft law, education campaigns for considering the digital divide within our structure, reevaluating risk assessment frameworks with central interaction and intersection between risks, and then assessing our supply chains for critical materials with quantum application. One final recommendation that we didn't put on here, which is not a specific quantum-related recommendation, and it's a more general one, is to continue to encourage the types of interdisciplinary research which have brought us all here, allowing us to work together. And on that note, we want to thank Michael, Melissa, and Benoit for guiding us the last 2 weeks, and also to all the supporters and mentors of the program. I will pause here because I think we need to pause the live stream for questions and remarks.
Hi, everyone. Today we will be presenting cybersecurity and misinformation. My name is Sarah. We have over here Jato, Zain, Ariel, Taya, and CJ. So we want to give a quick outline of what we're going to be doing. We're going to introduce our questions, and we're going to give the definitions. Then we're going to show how we approached our research, and we're going to show some solutions. And finally, we will have some recommendations. And if you'll have any questions, we will have time for that. So to begin, our guiding questions were, how has misinformation developed? And are there any impacts of misinformation on cybersecurity? Then we wanted to see if there are any ways to counter misinformation, and are there any factors that influence how people might be able to adopt the countermeasures. So our purpose was to understand the impacts of misinformation on cybersecurity and explore effective countermeasures. So crazily enough, we found that there are many definitions of cybersecurity. We had to decide what we were going to say cybersecurity is for our purpose for this report. We decided that we are going to say cybersecurity involves the use of technologies, processes, anything to protect the systems, networks, programs, and devices from cyber attacks. And specifically, we want to say that there are some key aspects like the human practices and processes that are going to be a major factor. And finally, we do want to keep in mind that it's about prevention, detection, and the response to cyber attacks. Jato will go through the misinformation slides.
The advancement and development of information and communication technologies have offered people and organizations tremendous opportunities to improve everyday life. But at the same time, they have given rise to a lot of challenges, such as information disorder, which has been given a great deal of attention worldwide. The information disorder has been modeled generally into three categories: misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. The three main categories. According to the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, and I quote, the effects of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation cost the global economy billions of dollars every year. These phenomena have really impact on different areas and sectors, which make them key concerns for society. Misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And how can we define them? And I would be straightforward, just to help you catch exactly the meaning of each of these kind of information. The misinformation, it is a kind of information that is released, that is spread without intention to harm. But whereas disinformation it's a kind of information which is released with the intention to harm a target, like a person, a group, or an organization, or a country. And malinformation is another type of information. But this kind of information is a content that is based on truthful, it's like element, which is based on the reality. But the intent is to harm or to cause damage to a target, a specific target. But how can we just couple these concepts? Misinformation and disinformation can be false, inaccurate, deceptive. And disinformation and malinformation, these two kinds, they have attention to harm specifically. And these are the key difference that we have found in these three concepts that are modeled as elements of information disorder. And to better understand, and I'm gonna invite you to look at it's like the overview and the development of this information with regard to cybersecurity.
Merci, So, to begin a comprehensive overview of misinformation, we looked into the literature to establish a set of factors relevant to the dissemination of misinformation and their implications for human-centric cybersecurity. So these include the political, policy and regulatory, economic and financial, societal, and technological factors. As a political scientist, I will start with the most important. So we found that the spread of misinformation is heavily influenced by the political environment, both domestically and internationally. Political misinformation includes false information about political groups, processes, and figures. Political misinformation does not require expert knowledge of what's going on in politics for it to be convincing. It can be easily spread by political actors as well as non-political actors. So politicians and interest groups increasingly use misinformation as a strategic tool to sway public opinion and policy decisions. During critical events like elections, coordinated misinformation campaigns often target specific groups to influence opinions and mobilize support. In Canada, federal political parties are exempt from any privacy laws, allowing them to handle personal information with minimal oversight, raising concerns about the strategic use of misinformation and data breaches because that's something that they do not need to mention. So foreign actors also disseminate misinformation to meddle in other nations' internal politics. They often use social media to influence voting behavior in their favor. This undermines trust in the democratic process and fosters belief in falsehoods. Likewise, the lack of regulations and governmental oversight and the unwillingness of technological enterprises to regulate misinformation on their platforms have contributed to the dissemination of misinformation online. We have also acknowledged that creators and digital platforms may be geographically out of reach of specific in-country laws and regulations. So this is a possible factor for ineffective misinformation-focused regulations. So there's a problem here with how we're going to approach this in the legal aspect as well. So combined, we've concluded that these realities present a challenge for the implementation of policy and regulation. There are also financial incentives to use misinformation. So among creators and platforms, they want to produce and allow the spread of misinformation for their financial gain. The spread of misinformation can influence people's behaviors, including their economic decisions, which has consequences for individuals and markets alike. And finally, the usability of social media. Platforms play a crucial role in disseminating information, enabling rapid and widespread sharing of information, both accurate and misleading. The flexibility and segmentation provided by social media platforms enables individuals to select information that confirms their existing beliefs, creating echo chambers that reinforce biases and limit exposure to diverse viewpoints or opinions that people might not even want to hear. So readers are less likely to pay attention to anything that weakens their viewpoint and are also unlikely to be critical of things that they think is just to be true. So if anything is in line with their pre-existing beliefs and preferences, they're unlikely to be fact-checking. So these factors combine to have far-reaching consequences such as undermining public trust, democratic backsliding, and negatively affecting public safety and behavior.
Thank you, dear. So continuing with what the groundworks were set with the critique of social media, I'm going to continue with the technological factors. So social media sets the ground for silos and echo chambers which basically means it's a collection, it's a group of people coming together with the same views, same opinions, and they're reinforcing each other whether they're true or not. And this is a very big concern for misinformation in the realm of cybersecurity. Continuing on within technological factors, the second thing I want you to think about is AI-generated content. And so AI-generated content through platforms like ChatGPT. These platforms are connected to the internet, which means that they're using internet resources, which can be misinformed. And second factor I would like to point out is they don't often point out their sources. They don't cite their sources. And so there's no way to verify the information that ChatGPT or other AI platforms are providing you with. The third thing I would like to point out, the third technological factor, is deepfakes. So deepfakes are another form of AI-generated content where, for example, one person's face is put on another person's body, or one person's voice is put on another person's face to basically create fake content, create misinformation to lead society into a way which can be malicious. We often see these in the form of politics. You see politicians being, deepfakes of politicians being used in times of elections, for example. So going on, there's basically two forms of approaches that can be taken to deal with misinformation in cybersecurity. The first one is proactive approaches, and the second one is reactive approaches. So far, we've always dealt with reactive approaches. We see all these negative consequences, and then we decide to react to it. We would like to push the idea of taking proactive approaches so that things don't get bad to begin with. So within technological solutions, the first proactive approach I would like to point out is automated content labeling. We believe that once content is put out there, there should be algorithms, there should be systems which automatically labels the content. This can be what the content is, whether it's misinformed, what sources it's coming from, etc. The second is blockchain and watermarks. This is very, very well known in the research industry. They think it's a great solution. We do have our critiques of it, which is that it puts all the cognitive load on the user, which means that the user is required to check the watermarks, make sure that it's true, it's genuine, it's not fake. And so we don't think this is a very practical solution. The third one is automated tools for detection and notifications. So whenever misinformation is detected, it should be taken down. Whenever you're uploading misinformed content, you should be informed that whatever you're posting is incorrect, and it should go through verified resources to make sure that you aren't putting misinformation out there. In terms of reactive approaches within technological solutions, the first one is identifying and removing disseminators. So basically any person, any page that is known for putting out malicious content, for putting out misinformation, should be taken down. While this isn't foolproof, it's much better than what we currently have. And while you might critique it in a way that they can continue making new accounts, at least their reach will be much shortened. They'll start with 0 followers all over again every time. The second one is, again, bot and automated detection. It's similar to the last one. It's just a reactive version of it. So if the content has already been posted, it can get detected later on in the process, and it can still be taken down. The third one is algorithm transparency. So a big critique of social media that we have is that we don't understand the algorithms. Connecting this back to the silo chambers that I mentioned earlier, silos and echo chambers, sorry. We want to make sure we understand how people are grouped together, why you are seeing the content you are seeing, and we want to be able to work around that. We want to be able to create algorithms that don't lead to silos and echo chambers. And the last one is detection of deepfakes. We believe that AI is being used to create malicious content, to create misinformation, and we believe that the cure to that is also AI. We use AI for good purposes. We use AI to detect misinformation. We use AI to detect deepfakes. I'll pass it on.
So as for the human-centric solutions, the proactive measures seems to be more focused on the concept of inoculations, which states that if individuals are forewarned of that they might be exposed to misinformation online and then exposed to example of how they're misled by false information, then they can become more immune to misinformation. We kind of view inoculation as a vaccine against misinformation, since it's known to spread around cyberspace just like a virus. Inoculation approaches have been successfully applied to any misinformation online regarding climate change, conspiracy theory, hate speech, and COVID-19. Also with the same concept, pre-banking relate to inoculations to build preemptive resilience towards false information, but it focuses more on how people can generate their own counter arguments to better face false information. Pre-banking approaches can often be seen in the form of online games, which will exhibit a sort of social media-like environment where people can improve their abilities to recognize misinformation. Some of the games that we see can simulate social media feeds where players are impersonating like a fake news producer, trying to gain as many followers as possible and trying not to lose its credibility at the same time. However, we are very aware that trying to pre-bank every single individual online against every single misinformation online is almost impossible, and it needs to be combined with improved critical thinking skills to ensure a better identification of misinformation. For the reactive approach in human-centric solution, we found, in contrast to pre-banking, debunking refers to a process of presenting the verified information after the individual have been established that previous content was in fact misinformation. It's a rather popular reactive approach, I would say, as there are multiple fact-checking sites which are used to correct misinformation online. And debunking can be based on more facts and logic and focuses more on how misinformation spreaders use manipulation techniques. There's also crowd-generated misinformation flagging, which kind of resemble automated content labeling in the technological solution, but they also directly engage with misinformation spreaders on social media platforms. So individuals who are active on social media can play a crucial role on identifying misinformation when a social media platform allow them to report and flag false information that they post. A good example of that would be Birdwatch, which was developed by X, formerly Twitter, where individuals with a Twitter account used to be able to actively engage to identify posts which they believe might be misleading or false.
So based on the findings of our report, we came up with 5 key recommendations. So to start off with, the first recommendation is mandating policy change for social media accountability. So a recent relevant example is over in the UK, we have passed the Online Safety Act last year. This act aims to protect users of social media by holding these platforms accountable to being transparent about what kind of potentially harmful content might be present on the platforms. It also gives users of the platforms more control over the kind of content that they want to see or that they might be exposed to. The act also criminalizes the intentional spread of disinformation. And what's really important to note here is that the Act actually applies to companies that aren't based in the UK. So provided that the company has some kind of link to the UK, for example, it has a large base of UK-based users, the company or the platform has to adhere to the Online Safety Act as well. So to us, this is a really promising indication that actually the legislation and the regulation that is required to tackle misinformation has already been done elsewhere. And perhaps this could also be done in Canada as well. Our second recommendation is about increasing public awareness and education. So the responsibility of fact-checking and fighting misinformation should not solely fall on individuals. However, increasing education around what misinformation is, how to spot misinformation, and how to conduct fact-checking could go a long way to helping to reduce the spread and the impact of online misinformation. Related to that, our third recommendation is about enhancing digital literacy initiatives. So there are a couple of these that exist already. One of them is run by Google, and it's aimed at children. And it essentially teaches them how to share with care online. So it teaches them how to spot information that may not be accurate. It teaches them what AI is and the kind of content that AI can produce. And this program has showed really promising results. And so if we're able to expand these programs, that would be a step in the right direction. Something important to note here is we should also target other demographics. Older individuals have been shown in research to be very vulnerable to believing and sharing misinformation. And so we can't just target younger individuals, we need to target other demographics as well. Another crucial recommendation is to improve this automated content labeling and the algorithm transparency. So we discussed that earlier in our presentation, but essentially we need to implement these systems that automatically label content to warn users about its credibility. We've seen this been successful in the past with alcohol and smoking programs, and so we know it can be done. Also, having more transparency about how algorithms work can enable people to make more informed decisions about the content they see. And then finally, using AI to detect misinformation. So we know that AI has the capability to analyze vast amounts of data in real time. And so this is a tool that we absolutely must use in the detection and reduction of misinformation online. So thank you for listening today, and we welcome any questions.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming and for not leaving. Welcome to the AI Group's presentation on AI and trust in the context of digital identity management. So overall, our report touches upon digital identity management and AI. So we will be looking at digital identity management, practices, impacts, and risks, as well as the consequences that result from digital identity management, specifically the misuse of digital identities through digital identity theft, and introducing the concept as AI as a solution. And this leads to challenges of AI adoption, which includes the complexities, vulnerabilities, regulations and standards, as well as costs associated with the use of AI. And overall, we found that trust as a critical component for AI adoption. Therefore, our report focuses on mechanisms for trust building, and we provide recommendations for technical requirements, human oversight and AI decision-making, cooperative efforts, and lastly, funding. So some key terminology in our report includes digital identity, which we define as personal information, digital footprints that go into ensuring secure access for an individual to their online data and online platforms and their computer systems. This is done through authentication, which includes verifying what an individual knows, such as a username and password used for login credentials, as well as a characteristic of an individual, such as biometric data about an individual. We also discussed digital identity theft, which is a consequence of the misuse of digital identity. We touch upon artificial intelligence, which in the context of digital identity management would include using information such as data on digital identities, as well as personal information or even behaviors of individual users in the external environment to predict and recognize either misuses of digital identity or unauthorized access instances to online data and online platforms. And therefore, the motivation of our paper is focusing on trustworthy AI, which we define as a set of beliefs that an individual has that determines their confidence in AI producing safe, reliable, and fair outcomes in the context of digital identity management.
So we often have to identify ourselves to gain access or give access to information and resources. In the physical world, this usually means like verifying someone's physical attributes or their voice or their behaviors and mannerisms. It's kind of like more intuitive in a way, or even other documentation. But in the digital world, this is a little bit more complicated. So we need to identify ourselves to the computer so it knows that we have the right to access to whatever information we want to access, and also to build trust with others in a way. Like others have to know that you are who you say they are. So for example, your bank needs to know that if you're requesting access to your bank account, you are you. If you're talking to your friends online or your family or like sharing a gossip, for example, you need to make sure you're talking to the right person and not someone stranger, and that information will be leaked. And we are all potential for cyber threats, like we're potential targets for that. So identifying ourselves in the digital world is really important. We can identify ourselves sometimes by maybe something you have, like your phone or a YubiKey, something you know, like your credentials or passwords, or something that you are, like your biometrics. And the secure system will provide you with identification, authentication, authorization, accountability in a way that is efficient and will protect you against your data, against malicious and unauthorized access or illegal access. It's important to note also that doesn't matter how secure something is. If it's going to take you 2 hours to access an email, that probably is going to be a spam. You're not going to be very happy about it. So efficiently is really important. But of course, there are risks. Anything involving technology, there are vulnerabilities. Security can never be 100% guaranteed. A lot of security systems have a non-human-centric design, so it's often based on the computer and with the computer in mind and not taking into account the human brain or human behavior. A classic example, I'm sure everybody here has some frustrations with passwords. The secure password usually is a long string of characters, random characters, and you're supposed to remember all of them. You're supposed to remember multiple passwords. And that's not very realistic. None of us do it. So humans have to find coping strategies to deal with that. And those coping strategies can look like against the security measures, like writing the password down or repeating the same password over and over again, which makes it more vulnerable and inefficient authentication and can lead to identity theft. So.
Thank you, Paula. So, identity theft is a serious issue, actually. So, according to the stats, 91% of Canadians are concerned about their digital identity. And that's a valid concern because 23% of identity fraud cases and 48% of extortion cases are actually cyber crimes. And among all the cyber crimes, identity fraud and extortion stand for 62% of those crimes. Also, the impacts of identity theft are severe. So it can financially impact individuals, businesses, and governments. And also it can cause legal issues for both individuals and businesses. It can also damage business reputations, and also it can cause customers trusting the affected business. It can, again, interfere with elections, and it can put a heavy burden on the government, actually. It also causes health issues on individuals like anxiety, distress, anger, and so on. So in order to protect people's identities on the digital world, we have some very famous strategies, like using two-factor authentication, using our phone when we want to log into our work email or our bank account. Or we have a credit monitoring, alerting people about their credit activities and keeping record of those activities. And also, we have insurance and legal protections. But all of these come with issues. For the two-factor authentication that we're using, so it appears that many people think it is very difficult and disturbing to use two-factor authentication every time they want to log in the system. And if they're given an option, they won't use it. Also, another issue is that two-factor authentication, like any other technology, still has its vulnerabilities. And the credit monitoring and legal protection also puts the burden on the users. So the question is, can AI come to the rescue now?
So as my colleague was telling us about some of the traditional methods in use that are getting a little bit weaker right now because somebody else is using some of the systems to make them weaker too. So it's not just the AI is always in the hands of citizens. Sometimes it's also in the hands of someone at the back end trying to create some issues with existing technologies. So the question comes in, can AI help in the market that we have right now? Well, AI, yes, it comes along with some of the benefits. Some of the benefits like it can definitely work on the data. Like rest of the technologies we have in the market these days, all of them work on the data. So does AI. AI works on analyzing your data, monitoring it, and how does it do that? It does on your human behavior. It actually reads your behavior. So as simple as that, your typing speed, how many mouse clicks you are making, how many times you are moving your head. It analyzes that behavior and it records that to understand how your behavior can become a part of the technology. So it's using it to do a continuous verifications. It's using it to do authentication on its part, which in turn, yes, it is detecting a lot of vulnerabilities. At the same time, it's also saving you from them. So what is it doing? It's removing the burden from the users all the time to protect their identities. Yes, there was a point of time users like me, you, all of us, we were protecting it, but right now the burdens are not the same anymore. The burdens are increasing right now with the use of AI system at the back end, at the cybersecurity corner as well. So if we go somewhere here, it looks like such a beginning of a new love story between AI and humans, but like every story comes with some of the issues. So do we have here as well? We have barriers, we have technical barriers, like the opaque nature of AI. A lot of times when AI is giving you the results, you don't know why is it giving, why AI is saying something we don't know. So that's one thing, is a technical barrier. It depends upon the data quality. Privacy and security concerns are there. Issues of biasness and fairness of the data is there because AI is again fed on a lot of data, and some of the data in the world has been seen that it has been biased, sometimes towards some different communities, sometimes different group of citizens. So that has been some of the technical barriers that we are facing right now. But as I told you, the friendship is still in a very early stage, so that's why maybe we are having this kind of barriers. But we have some non-technical barriers too, like high cost, public perception and trust, lack of regulatory and legal frameworks. We have recently seen that EU first time came up with the AI Act. So does Canada is preparing itself too with AIDA, and we have Bill C-27 right now. But these are all right now in the process, because as AI is developing, these laws are developing as well. There are some of the socio-economic disparities and geopolitical tensions are there as well, which we can see in the market right now. Some of the biggest players of the AI right now are in the tensions, which it affects in the entire AI ecosystems, because along with that, there is less of a data sharing, knowledge sharing, which all affects on the growth of AI. So where does it hurt the most? It hurts the most to a human at the point of trust, because that makes a human feel vulnerable. It hits at the point where people are talking about, is AI is going to take away my job? Job, trust, public perception, these are the problems that we are facing right now. So this is where my colleague comes in, and she's going to take it from.
Hello. So we've talked a little bit about how AI technologies could be a solution to identity management, but we've also identified the fact that AI may not be a viable solution as long as people don't trust in it. So we've looked at, oh, that's the back button, ways that we can repair what we've called the trust deficit. So we introduced 4 different mechanisms, and we identify specific requirements within each mechanism, as well as particular recommendations that go along with those requirements. So our first is our technical requirements, and we need transparent and fair outcomes, quality data and formatting, and enhanced privacy and security. So the recommendations that we put forth to address these needs include making a variety of methods available to support users in explaining how AI makes decisions, adopting standardized data formats, and using pre-processing tools to ensure that high-quality data is available for training AI, to ensure AI is equipped with appropriate tools aimed at protecting sensitive information, and that these must be continuously updated. We also talk about human oversight in AI decision-making as a mechanism of building trust. And in order to achieve this, we must have ethical and responsible deployment of AI models, user consent, and accountability and fairness. So the recommendations that we put forth that address these include establishment of review boards and approval processes to validate the security of AI before it is deployed, ensuring individuals know how their digital identity is used, stored, and shared, and developing oversight protocols for existing AI models to ensure that we're mitigating biases and resolving them. We also require cooperation efforts, which we refer to as collaboration between public, private, and academic sectors in order to put out regulatory development, standardization, and ethical knowledge sharing. And for these, our recommendations include setting precise rules for the development of AI and delineating specific responsibilities within those rules for developers, implementers, and users, and mandating that organizations also adopt appropriate accountability frameworks alongside these. In terms of standards, we recommend procedural and technological standards be put in place to identify vulnerabilities, ensure interoperability, and promote best practices within the AI industry, and these must be set by certifying bodies. We also recommend the establishment of platforms dedicated to the secure exchange of data, knowledge, experiential knowledge, research outcomes, and technology in order to ensure holistic, fair, and ethical AI development is possible. And finally, everything comes back to the money. So we discussed funding, and this can take a variety of forms. So our recommendations include, like for government, investment in AI and digital identity management training and education for law enforcement and regulators might be a mechanism of providing funding. And if that's implemented, it should be in addition to incentives to ensure that those experts are retained in public service positions. For businesses, collaborating with the federal government to produce funding programs for small and medium-sized businesses that are specifically researching the development, design, and adoption of AI for digital identity management. And for individuals, education and training programs should be made available that can equip them with the skills and knowledge of how AI is designed, implemented, and deployed in order to ensure they have informed consent. So I'm going to invite my colleagues back to the hot seat, and we'll take some questions.